This is vindictive. You always hated being in the background, and now you're turning her death into a stage. I stayed quiet for years, I said. You mistook that for obedience. Dad opened his mouth, but I cut him off before he could pivot the narrative. I pulled the small recorder from my pocket, set it gently on the table, and pressed play. Anuna's voice filled the room, thin, weathered, but firm. If they try to twist this, Leora, you show them this time. I trust you, only you. No one spoke when it ended. Diane stood frozen, her hands curled at her sides. Alina looked down at her coffee, like it might offer a way. I reached into my folder and slid another envelope across the counter. Filed this morning, I said. An injunction to freeze the estate until everything is reviewed. Dad's mouth tightened. You're trying to dismantle this family. The floorboard creaked under my foot, but no one noticed. I was standing just outside the study, hand half raised to knock, when I heard my father's voice, measured, dismissive, like he was reading off a grocery list. Your sister, she doesn't deserve a dime. She's out. I didn't breathe. I didn't blink. The sound of my own pulse flooded my ears. Inside, Alina didn't protest. She didn't pause. And then I heard Mom, Diane, let out a low, satisfied hum. I stepped back slightly, just enough to see through the sliver between the door and the frame. Diane was seated on the edge of the leather couch, cup of tea in her hand, her mouth curled into that tight, knowing smile she used whenever a plan came together. She looked content, composed, as if cutting me out wasn't cruel. It was inevitable. I closed my eyes and stepped away before they saw me. The walk upstairs felt longer than it should have. My feet were light, but my limbs felt like lead. I didn't cry. Not then. Not ever for them. I sat at the edge of the guest bed and opened my laptop. My fingers moved faster than my thoughts. Passwords, security codes, verification texts. Within minutes, everything I owned was transferred to a private account, one they didn't know existed, one they never would. They thought I'd stay frozen in that hallway, too stunned to move. They thought I'd keep playing the role, helpful, invisible, safe. What they didn't know is that I'd suspected something for weeks. The skipped invitations, forced smiles, the estate paperwork that never made it to my inbox. What they didn't know was that I knew about Grandma's second trust, the one they tried to pretend never existed, the one that had matured 2 weeks ago. I closed the laptop gently, walked to the dresser, unlocked the top drawer beneath old scarves and a photo of Anunis. There it was, a slip of paper in her handwriting with one name on it. Mine.it hadn't started with the trust. It started smaller. My name missing from the group text about Thanksgiving plans. A family photo posted on Diane's social media, cropped just before my shoulder. A dinner where Alina toasted to family, and her eyes skipped right over me. I told myself it was grief, that people get strange after loss, that maybe I had become a ghost in their house because it reminded them too much of Grandma. I even apologized once, out loud, for being a lot lately. No one corrected me. Looking back, I see it now for what it was, rehearsal, a slow, methodical unraveling of my place at the table, one polite omission at a time. Alina had always been their favorite, not because she asked for it, but because she wore it like a custom-made dress. She knew how to lean in when Diane talked legacy. She learned Dad's business tone before she ever had a job. She was the one they introduced at events, the one who got a room with a view and a seat near the will. And I was useful, quietly, invisibly, the one who helped Grandma balance her books when the tremors in her hand got too strong, the one who wrote the thank you notes Diane couldn't be bothered with, the one who held everything together so they could pretend nothing was falling apart. I had told myself that being good would be enough, but Alina was always 5 steps ahead, and Diane played the long game. That smile I saw yesterday, it wasn't new. I'd seen it before, during Christmas, when I showed up with gifts and found out the dinner had been cooked, during Grandma's funeral, when I gave the eulogy and no one clapped, but Diane said, that was brave. I just hadn't known what I was looking at, until now. I unfolded the slip of paper from Anunis' drawer and read it again. The ink still crisp despite the months. There was an address, a name, and a key taped behind it. The key fit perfectly into the lock beneath Anunis' old sewing desk. I hadn't touched that drawer in years. Grandma used to joke that it held memories better left folded. But when I slid it open, the contents didn't feel like memories. They felt like instructions. There were 3 things inside. The first, a legal envelope, heavy and embossed, marked Amendment to Last Will and Testament. I recognized the notary seal, the witness signatures, the date, just 1 month before Eunice passed. My name was printed cleanly on every page, my name and only mine. The second was a voice recorder. I pressed play with hands steadier than they should have been. Her voice filled the quiet, soft but certain. If they try to twist this, Leora, you show them this tape. I trust you, only you. It wasn't long, just 23 seconds, but it said more than Diane had said to me in years. The third was a note, 4 lines in Eunice's angular handwriting, slanted from decades of ledger work. Blood doesn't make them worthy. If you're reading this, they've already turned on you. Take what's yours. Don't look back. I sat back in the chair and stared at the words until they blurred, not from tears, but from recognition. She knew it, not just about the money, about them, about how they twist legacy into legend, how they dress up erasure in polite tongues and legal goodness. She knew they'd weaponized tradition and make me feel like the one who failed to belong. And still, she gave me this, not just the will, the clarity, the voice, the proof. I packed the envelope, the note, the recorder, every piece of her final move, and slid them into my bag. By morning, I wasn't going to ask for space at the table anymore. I was going to lay the truth flat on it. The kitchen was already humming when I walked in. Alina sat perched at the end of the island, coffee in hand, legs crossed like a woman who had already won. Dad flipped through printed spreadsheets, his reading glasses sliding down the bridge of his nose. Diane stood at the stove, stirring oatmeal, humming a familiar tune, like we were all just another family starting another peaceful morning. None of them looked up when I entered. I pulled out the manila envelope from my bag and laid it flat on the counter between the croissants and the legal pads. Alina noticed first. Her eyes flicked from my face to the envelope and then narrowed. "What's this?" she asked, the words more reflex than question. Dad didn't look up. "We're in the middle of something, Leora. Could this wait?" "No," I said simply. I slid the envelope closer to him. "You'll want to read this." Diane turned, wooden spoon still in hand, and glanced at the seal. Her smile faltered, but just slightly. Alina scoffed. "Seriously, you brought your own paperwork? Is this some attempt to insert yourself again?" I didn't answer her. I just opened the flap and pulled out the will, the amendment, unfolded it carefully, placed it between them like a card turned in the final round of a game they thought I wasn't playing. Signed, witnessed, dated, I said, tapping the signature line with my index finger. "You remember Beverly, right? Grandma's friend from the garden club. She was there. So was the notary." Dad's fingers clenched around the armrest of his chair. Diane said nothing, but the wooden spoon was trembling. Alina reached for the paper like she could crumple it into denial, but I blocked her hand with mine. "Don't," I said, voice low. "You already knew what you were doing. You don't get to act surprised now." For the first time in years, the room was quiet, not just silent, hollowed out, the kind of silence that only happens when truth rips the ceiling off a lie. I left the papers there and walked to the sink, poured myself a glass of water. No one moved. They didn't need to. The damage was already done, and I hadn't even pressed play on the recording yet. "You've crossed a line," Diane said, her voice tight with controlled fury. "This wasn't what your grandmother intended." I met her eyes and didn't blink. "You're right," I said. She intended honesty. She left that to me. Alina laughed, sharp and hollow. "No," I said calmly. "I'm just refusing to let it dismantle me." I gathered the documents, slipped them back into my bag, and walked toward the door. No shouting, no final words, just footsteps across hardwood. Let them sit in the silence. Let them wonder what else I had prepared. I stepped into the hallway and pulled out my phone. A text waited from my attorney, injunction accepted. Funds are frozen pending review. You're in control of next steps. I stared at the screen a moment longer, then turned off the recorder in my hand. I wasn't just their daughter anymore. I was the executor of the truth, The elevator opened onto the executive floor of Maddox and Lang. The receptionist glanced up, startled, then quickly stood as I passed. I didn't pause. I walked straight into the boardroom, where 5 of the senior partners were already seated, murmuring over financial projections and Q3 forecasts. Their conversation stopped when they saw me. Leora Thomas, the senior partner, squinted. "We weren't expecting you." "You are now," I said, laying a folder onto the polished table. "As of last week, I hold controlling interest in the firm, 51% assigned through the trust by Anunis Maddox and now upheld through a notarized amendment. You'll find all documentation in there." Alina was already in her seat, arms crossed so tight her knuckles turned white. "This is a stunt," she said. "No," I said, sitting at the head of the table. "This is succession." The room remained still until the door burst open. Ray walked in, breathing hard, cheeks flushed. "This is outrageous," he snapped. "You can't just—" "I can," I said calmly, opening a second folder. "And I will, starting with transparency." I handed out copies of internal transaction reports, ones the old accounting team had conveniently buried. "Page 3, I said. Chase Maddox used corporate funds to cover personal gambling losses. Over $80,000 in expenses labeled client entertainment lead directly to his personal Venmo. Ray opened his mouth, but I wasn't finished. "And page 5, your LLC, Blue Ridge Advisory, listed as a vendor to the firm, except it doesn't provide consulting. It launders distributions from the estate through padded invoices. It's all there, bank transfers, timestamps, even the shell corporation in the Caymans." Alina stood up so fast her chair scraped against the wall. "You've been spying on your own family." I looked at her squarely. "I've been protecting what's left of Grandma's name." Thomas cleared his throat, glancing through the documents. "You weren't made aware of any of this." "More now," he said. Ray stared at me across the table, not with fury this time, but with something smaller, something unraveling. I didn't flinch because the nameplate in front of me no longer read guest. It read Managing Partner. The report came in at dawn, 112 pages of dressed in professional language and polished formatting. The forensic team had combed through 6 years of records. What they found didn't surprise me. It confirmed what I already knew. They hadn't just tried to cut me out. They'd been bleeding the foundation dry all along, a 6-figure string of consulting fees traced back to an account in Alina's name, one she opened right after Grandma's first hospitalization, dozens of fake invoices billed to departments that didn't exist, equipment rentals that never arrived, shell companies registered to P.O. boxes in Florida, Delaware, and Zurich. And then, the final piece, an offshore account tied directly to Diane, quietly named under a holding firm with no physical office. The lead investigator didn't even look shocked when he handed me the summary. "You've got enough to file," he said, "criminal and civil." I nodded once, then forwarded the entire report to the legal team with one line in the email: "Proceed fully." By late morning, my attorney called. "We can file the charges today, but you need to be certain. This will be public loud." "I am," I said. "This isn't about vengeance. It's about respect for Grandma, for what she built, for what they were supposed to protect." He was silent for a moment, then said, "Understood. We'll initiate proceedings this afternoon." I ended the call and looked out the office window. Below, the city moved on without hesitation, people walking to coffee shops, glancing at their watches, unlocking front doors. That was the part they never understood. I never needed to win to feel whole. I just needed the lies to stop. The report sat open beside me, page after page. I highlighted sections and left notes for the compliance team. I didn't flinch when I got to the numbers tied to my father's retirement fund. I didn't pause when Alina's signature showed up on falsified contracts, because healing doesn't mean staying quiet. It means telling the truth out loud, on record, with your name signed underneath it, and my name wasn't going away. It was just beginning to mean something again. The message came through just after noon, a simple text: 1 hour. No lawyers. You owe me that much. I didn't respond. I just showed up. The garden behind St. Paul's was almost too quiet, the same bench where Anunis used to sit during choir practice, the same flower beds Diane had once pretended to care for, phone tucked behind her sunglasses, whispering to the estate planner while pruning roses. She was already there when I arrived, wearing white, clean lines, not a wrinkle in sight. She looked up as I approached and patted the space beside her on the bench. I didn't sit. I have to hand it to you, she said softly, folding her hands in her lap. I underestimated you. That was your first mistake, I said. But not your last. You think this is about power. Her voice remained gentle, unbothered. I kept this family together, Leora. Every time your father faltered, I held the line. Every time Alina broke down, I steadied her. You were always the wild card. You wanted the truth, but didn't care how much it cost. I stepped closer, my voice low. You didn't hold anything together. You controlled it. There's a difference. Her eyes looked to mine, a flicker of something blue. No, just calculation. Everything crumbles, she whispered. Even the truth. You'll see. It starts slow, then all at once. I studied her face. The calm was still there, but the certainty had cracks. She stood slowly, smoothing her dress, like the conversation had gone the way she intended. I don't expect forgiveness, she said. But I do expect consequences. I said nothing, not a word, not a nod. I turned and walked down the stone path, leaving her behind with her silence. She didn't follow. Back at the office, I signed the final documents authorizing the testimony release. Every asset, every dollar, every name. The courtroom date was already stamped on the calendar. The courtroom didn't feel cold, but something in the air made every breath heavier. I took the stand, swore my name under oath, and opened the folder I'd rehearsed in silence for months. I started with the basics. The dates, the discrepancies, the names tied to transfers they assumed would never be traced. I spoke evenly, no embellishment, no theatrics, just facts. Then I played the audio, Anina's voice, clear and direct, echoing in the room. If they try to twist this, Leora, you show them this tape. I trust you, only you. The judge nodded slightly, but said nothing. I handed over Grandma's handwritten letter, her signature, her ink, for lines that cut through every defense they'd built. Alina took the stand next. Her tone was measured, sympathetic, practiced. We were protecting the family legacy, she said. We didn't want conflict. We wanted harmony. Leora was unstable. She wouldn't have known what to do with her responsibility. I didn't look at her while she spoke. I looked at the judge when it was my turn again. I said it quietly but firmly. Erasing someone isn't protection. It's cowardice dressed in silk. Alina flinched. Diane looked away. I finished with one final statement. This isn't about inheritance. It's about being rewritten. I am not unstable. I'm not dramatic. I was inconvenient to their version of the story, and I'm here to set it straight. The judge took a moment, then two, then spoke. The amended will stands. Full control of the estate remains with Ms. Leora Maddox. Any misuse of funds by Ms. Alina Maddox and Mr. Ray Maddox will be referred for further legal action. Ms. Diane Maddox is permanently removed from any fiduciary authority related to the trust. I didn't cry. I didn't smile. I just breathed. Outside, I walked past the reporters without answering a single question. Back in the car, I took out the small journal Eunice had left behind and flipped to the dog-eared page, the one that simply read, "Truth doesn't scream. It stands." And now, so did I. The lake house was quiet again. No attorneys, no files, no echoes of courtroom doors closing behind me. Just the sound of water brushing against the dock and wind moving through trees Eunice planted long before any of us had something to fight over. I took off my shoes at the door, walked through the narrow hallway to her old reading room, and sat in the chair she used every morning, coffee in one hand, pen in the other. The journal was still there, just where I left it, brown leather, worn edges, her handwriting on every page, deliberate and unshaken. I flipped to the page I'd marked before the trial. The ink had faded slightly, but the words still rang louder than anything Alina or Diane had said in months. Sometimes blood must be drained for a body to breathe. I read it again, not with grief this time, but with understanding. They tried to rewrite the story, cut me from it, say I was too emotional, too dramatic, too difficult, but all they really did was clear the path. They handed me the pieces. I just chose to build instead of break. I stood by the window and watched the light shift across the water. They tried to bury me, I said aloud, voice steady, but they handed me the shovel. I didn't dig a grave. I planted something. And when I turned back toward the hallway, I locked the door behind me, not to shut them out, not in anger, but to mark a line. This was where their version ended and mine began.